Hey, honey.
Yes, Barry?
Let's get out of here.
Where are we going?
Where do we always go?
Este ritmo de palmas, sin naturaleza, hasta encontrar la playa. Por eso grito al mundo, yo soy de Puerto Vallarta. Samba de Puerto Vallarta, noche de arrullo en el mar. Samba de Puerto Vallarta.
Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to this episode of the Puerto Vallarta Travel Show. I'm your host, Barry Kessler, and I'm happy to be introducing you to my favorite vacation destination. Maybe it's even yours. If it's not, why not? It should be. It's Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. That music you're listening to is performed by Alberto Perez, and Alberto is the owner of the La Palapa group of restaurants, La Palapa and the El Dorado restaurant on the south side of town, right down on the beach in Puerto Vallarta. And if you play your cards right, you can catch Alberto Perez singing and playing the Samba de Puerto Vallarta and many more of his fantastic tunes while you enjoy dinner under the stars with your toes in the sand, right at the water's edge. Just so romantic and so Puerto Vallarta. You gotta go. So now before we get into this interview, I just want to do a little housekeeping. Now, first, as of a couple of days ago, and this podcast was recorded and produced February 26, 2017, here at the Puerto Vallarta Airport, the bank ATM machines have been removed from the lobby where you buy your taxi cab transfers. You know what I talked about. We talked about this in an earlier show. Now, people here on the ground are of the opinion that this is a temporary situation, at least until they're done with the remodel of the airport, or maybe sooner, who knows. But I'll keep you advised as to when they reappear. Until then, bring some pesos from home, either from your bank or from a money exchange near you. Or, hey, just buy your taxi voucher using your very own funny money from your very own country. And then, as soon as you get a chance, get to a bank-attached and affiliated ATM when you get a little chance later, like I said. Now, for more ideas on exchanging money, just go to my episode where I talk about exchanging money. I think it's episode 2 of the Puerto Vallarta Travel Show. Now, I'll have it actually marked in my show notes so you can take a look at it. Next, I have a new page on the website, and I'm very excited about this, my friends. It's all of the best webcams in Puerto Vallarta. Now, some of these cameras are really great for watching a sunset right from your Barca Lounger, right at home. So if you're not in Puerto Vallarta, you can actually catch a Puerto Vallarta sunset by going to my webcam page. Just go to www.puertovallartatravelshow.com and click on the webcam tab and catch your Puerto Vallarta sunset today. And if you happen to have a favorite website that I happen to have missed, a favorite webcam, send me a link and I'll add it right there for you. Now, I'm talking about a webcam in Puerto Vallarta. I'm not talking about some porno site, you guys. Don't be throwing me something like that, okay? But anyway, send me one. If you got a favorite, the more the merrier, right? Now, next, in the last episode, I talked a little bit about learning Spanish. I talked about learning how to count to 100 in Spanish, right? Now, I forgot to mention that if you go to my website, check my show notes on the last episode, I have a link to a site where you can learn how to count to 100 in Spanish. It's easy, it's free, and you're going to find it by going to PuertoVallartaTravelShow.com. The episode with JR and I, we're talking about the customs of the people of Puerto Vallarta. That's where you're going to find that link. I'll even put it into this episode too. So learn how to count to 100 in Spanish, you guys. Now, lastly, I have some new prices for the federal airport taxis, the ones that leave the airport, take you to your hotel or to your resort or to your condo or to your mom's house or to your Airbnb or to some bridge. I don't know. Anyway, those particular fees have changed. And just as soon as I finish my interview with author Howard Johns, which I'm going to get to right now, we will get to those particular new fees for the federal airport taxis. Now, most people know that Puerto Vallarta was put on the map by those wonderful folks in Hollywood. The filming of The Night of the Iguana turned this once tiny little fishing village into a jet-setter destination. And since this is a podcast about Puerto Vallarta, well, I'd be remiss if I were to ignore this pretty big piece of the historic puzzle of this place called Puerto Vallarta. So naturally, I reached out to my next guest, Howard Johns. And Howard is the author of the soon-to-be-released book called A Stolen Paradise, the true story about the making of The Night of the Iguana. Now, Howard Johns is a film historian. He's an author and a television personality from Palm Springs, California, my neck of the woods. In 2004, he wrote the best-selling nonfiction book, Palm Springs Confidential, Playground of the Stars, which sold out through 3 printings. Now, 2 years later, Howard published the scandalous follow-up, Hollywood Celebrity Playground, with similar success. Howard Johns has been interviewed on numerous TV news broadcasts and documentary programs discussing the lives and the deaths of celebrities. He first gained widespread recognition as a producer for NBC's live coverage of the funeral of Congressman Sonny Bono. Howard has met and interviewed such stars as Frank Sinatra, Bob Hope, Kirk Douglas, Stephanie Powers, the very tan George Hamilton, and Suzanne Summers. He's also been featured on top-rated network programs such as Entertainment Tonight, Inside Edition, and Hard Copy. So, without any further ado, let's go to my apartment in Puerto Vallarta, just 2 blocks from Casa Kimberly, the famous home of Elizabeth Taylor, and we'll talk about the filming of The Night of the Iguana and much more with author Howard Johns. Well, today I have a real treat for my listeners. Those of you who like Hollywood gossip, intrigue, maybe you want to have the real story behind the scenes of the filming of The Night of the Iguana. Well, that's the movie that put Puerto Vallarta on the map, and this is the episode for you guys. So today I'm with Howard Johns. He's the author of a soon-to-be-released book entitled A Stolen Paradise, the true story of the making of The Night of the Iguana. Howard, thanks for coming on the show.
It's my pleasure, Barry, and thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Well, I know that my listeners want to hear that the real story here. So, but before we get into the book, just tell us a little bit about yourself and what was your path to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico?
Well, I don't want to dish the dirt on my life. I want to talk about others. But seriously, I was coming down here for, 15 years. I came down to Puerto Vallarta for the first time in the year 2000. And I fell in love with the place. I was here literally a day,
Yeah.
And I said, wow, this is where I want to live. Seriously. Some places you go to, they have that magical effect on you. And this was like somebody, kissed me, it was like, wow. And I came back again. And every time I came back, I stayed longer and longer. So it turned into a love affair. And eventually I moved here. But I had written 2 books before. And anybody listening from Palm Springs, I say hi to my friends from Palm Springs in the desert because I wrote Palm Springs Confidential there, which was a big hit. It was a best-selling book. And that sold out through, I think, 3 printings. It was a really important book, too, especially for real estate agents and homeowners, because it identified the history of the homes people were buying and selling. Up till that time, most of it was hearsay, I went into the actual history of the homes and I researched the title deeds and everything to make sure that what realtors were doing was actually correct. They were identifying the history and putting the names of Marilyn Monroe on these houses, and Elvis Presley lived here and someone else slept there. And I set out to authenticate all that, and I did. But in the course of all that, I had to divulge the dirt, a little bit of the dirt, right? And that's where the scandal came in, and I got a reputation for that, which goes both ways. Some people like it, and some people say, you're a naughty boy, don't do that. You're giving away the secrets.
Yeah.
Which is also kind of what this new book's about. I don't give away the addresses necessarily, but I do tell you where the bodies are buried, or at least some of the bodies, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what intrigued me about coming to Puerto Vallarta, because everybody comes here, even if it's an unconscious association with the night of the Iguana, everybody's heard of the movie. A lot of people saw the movie, and the whole excitement surrounding the making of the movie, and you had Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton and John Huston creating history here. It's become the stuff of urban legend. It's really entered the history books, and yet, Barry, it's funny, there's never been a book written about the making of the movie.
Oh, I'm surprised to hear that.
So that's my long-winded answer, because really that's what intrigued me, and I said, you know what? I better do it before someone else does.
Absolutely. And
right?
Good for you.
And that's exactly what my motivation was. It wasn't my ego, right? It was the fact that I thought, I know enough about Hollywood, and I've written 2 books about that subject. I thought, if I really, work at it, I can do it here. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, silly me, right? The gringo in paradise concept of, I'm going to go down there, I'm going to knock on doors, people are going to talk to me, and we'll wrap this up in 7 months,
Right.
That was my concept. Well, little did I know it would turn into 7 years.
Wow.
It changed
that's a long time.
My whole life just completely did a 360 degree.
Now, why is that? Is it because those doors weren't opening so quickly? What was it?
The truth is, I was a stranger in paradise,
right?
To quote the song. I think I bit off more than I could chew. In my excitement and my enthusiasm, I thought this will be easy.
Yeah.
The truth is, it's the opposite. You're in a different country, Mexico, of course. It's a different culture, of course, a different language, different customs. Things don't happen the same way that you and I are used to in California and the rest of the United States. So that was a bit of a slap in the face. I thought, I've written 2 books. What's wrong? People weren't working fast enough, basically. So I said, well, okay, maybe I've gone about this the wrong way. I need to adapt to the Mexican way of thinking.
Oh, good.
Which is exactly what I did. And to make a long story short, I think it's a much better book. Had I done it fast, the way I originally intended, it would have been a superficial book. This way, I think the book is a lot more in depth. We are more sympathetic towards the people of Mexico, and certainly the residents of Puerto Vallarta, who put up with a hell of a lot during the making of that movie. I mean, it really was a culture shock at the time. Strip away for a minute, if you will, the glamour. Strip away all the excitement and the tinsel, and dig underneath what actually happened during the making of the movie is what I discovered, and how it impacted on Puerto Vallarta, not just on a real estate level, but a social level, bringing things to the people here they had never seen before. Some of these people had never even seen a movie at that time. When you go down to a place called Mismaloya. Some of your listeners may have heard of Mismaloya. That's where they made The Night of the Iguana. That was an Indian village. That had no contact with the outside world, basically, at that time. I mean, people went there on boats and did fishing. But other than that, you were going into the Flintstones territory up there. I mean, pretty much so.
I get it.
Yeah. So I learned so much in researching the book. I want to tell you, I did a lot of research in Los Angeles, courtesy of the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences, and I also used the Cineteca in Mexico City. So I had the 2 best cultural centers, the repositories of the archives of the cinema industry on both countries there to assist me in that. So it wasn't just hearsay. This is all stuff that I've had to go through and fact check, and I'm glad I did it. And I'm really excited to talk about that because the book is coming out soon. I'm so happy. I'm relieved of this now.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. Wow. So you call this a controversial book. So what's the controversy?
Well, the title should tip you off to that. I mean, the title is 3 words: A Stolen Paradise. Now, okay, for the people out there who are thinking, what's he talking about? Well, the key word there is stolen. Somebody stole it. Who stole it? Was it you? Was it me? No. But certainly, you could say the American investment maybe stole a lot. We stole a lot of property here. We stole a lot of the Mexican property because we don't own the land, but we stole the property. We really invaded them. But then even before that, you had the history of Mexico and the French trying to take it over. The Spanish, of course, prior to that. There's so many layers and layers and layers to this story. But the controversy that most people will be interested in is what happened during the making of the movie and how it changed Puerto Vallarta, which was in 1963 when they made the movie. Puerto Vallarta was a fishing village. That's it. The only people who came here were people who liked to go fishing and a few oddball, eccentric, wealthy people who liked to, drop off the map for a couple of months a year and go to places like Gringo Gulch, which is very familiar to people who've been coming to Puerto Vallarta for many years because this is pretty much where everybody lived in those days. There was no marina. There was no Nuevo Vallarta. Everything that constituted what Puerto Vallarta was at that time was based around the Rio Quali and the beach. Mm-hmm. The rest of it was just coconut trees and jungle.
Well, it has certainly changed, and it is amazing how absolutely, well, I wouldn't say desolate, but it was a quiet little fishing village, and boy, today it certainly has changed. So you've written that everybody involved in the film, or the filming of the picture, I should say, they hope that they'd benefit from success, from its success, but there were personal and professional costs to each of them. So we have the important key figures here. There's playwright Tennessee Williams. I don't know if you get into Tennessee Williams, but John Huston, the director, of course, Richard Burton, Elizabeth Taylor, Ava Gardner, Deborah Carr. So what prices did each of those people pay?
Well, look at those names, Barry. What a cast. Yeah. You can't make this stuff up. This is all true. These people came here to make a movie. Okay, that's the first thing. But let's start with Tennessee Williams. Without Tennessee Williams, there would be no Night of the Iguana, because before it was a movie, it was a play. Tennessee Williams had a lot riding on that play. It was his last major success as a playwright. Everything after that was downhill for him, unfortunately. He was, at one point, the greatest American playwright of the 20th century, and his life pretty much ended here. He was here during the production. His partner of many years, unfortunately, was ill with cancer and had passed away just prior to the movie being made. So I go into all that detail because it gives you a sense of poignancy to the story, just to kick it off. The fact that here is this wonderful writer in the form of Tennessee Williams, who was a very tortured, talented person, but what a sorry person he became. I really liked Tennessee Williams. He comes across in the story as a figure of pity. And I say that in the most helpful way, because you get to understand who this man was. Yes, he wrote Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. Yes, he wrote The Night of the Iguana and many other great plays, but most people only know him through those plays. They only know him through the characters that he wrote about. He was a very, very sensitive person. And coming down here from Florida, where he lived in Key West, and being present during the production of the movie was his attempt to really turn his life around. And it's one of the tragedies of the story that he could not change it. He could not save himself from his destiny, and you'll have to read the rest of the book to find out what happens. Now, the next person, of course, is John Huston, who was literally holding Tennessee's hand through a lot of this, because he needed Tennessee Williams They adapted the play, they turned it into a movie, but they cut a lot of stuff out that wasn't necessary, and they added new scenes to the film to take advantage of Puerto Vallarta. So you had Tennessee having basically his own desires and his own needs to be here during the film. You had John Huston, who was very, very dominant, as you know, a very strong, controlling personality, a large man with a huge, voice, a real character, who also had his own reasons for making the film here. And let me just backtrack for a little bit and tell you that the original play, for those of your listeners who've seen it or maybe have forgotten, the original play wasn't set in Puerto Vallarta. It was set in Acapulco. The plot thickens.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So here we have a play that's actually supposed to take place in Acapulco. John Huston says, oh, no, we want to make it in Puerto Vallarta. Well, he wanted to make it here because he had a reason. And one of his reasons was he wanted to get into the hotel business.
Oh, really?
So, yes.
So everyone wants to be a director. But
everybody wants to be a
hotel owner.
director, and everybody wants to own a hotel. Well, isn't that strange?
That's very weird, yes.
Well, John Huston was a man who gambled. He was we call him a Renaissance man. He was a person who lived the moment. He made a lot of money, and he spent a lot of money. He had a lot of women. He had a lot of racehorses. He was a very interesting, fascinating person. Even if he had never been a movie director, he probably would have gone down in history as being quite a character, I think. But when he made this movie, he was not living with his wife. He had taken a lover, a young girl that he had met. So he had a lot of personal issues at the time. So he wanted to make the movie here and hopefully make some extra money on the side. He liked to bet on the horses. So he also, wanted to make some money from this hotel venture that he was planning to do. So there was a reason, as I say, for him to make it here. And then, of course, you had Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. Now, I know some people are going to say to me, but Howard, Elizabeth wasn't in the movie.
That's right.
But she was here.
Now, how did that happen?
Well, it's very interesting. As you remember, well, you're old enough, I think, Cleopatra had just been released in 1963, the biggest movie of all time. It still, I think, holds the record for being the most expensive film ever made. Well, that movie was just a bombshell in every which way. And Richard Burton, as we know, had become involved with Elizabeth Taylor. And fast forward to the night of the Iguana, they offered him the lead role in the movie. And of course, when you hire Richard Burton, you get Elizabeth Taylor. Now, they couldn't afford her to play in the film, of course, but they certainly found the money to pay Richard. So she came along, and boy, what a lot of paparazzi she brought. She brought basically all the news media in the world at that time, left Rome, where Cleopatra was made, and then all came down to Puerto Vallarta to watch Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, or as they called them, Liz and Dick, in the jungle. So there's your other part of this story, where we're talking about what's going on while the movie's being made, what's actually happening in the house with Liz and her lover, because they were not married to each other at that time. They were still married to other people, and this whole volcano had erupted. You had the Roman Catholic Church condemning them.
Yeah.
You had John Huston sheltering them in
what
rented
about, what about
houses.
the American public? Weren't they a little bit put off by this kind of scandalous behavior?
Poor Debbie Reynolds. What a wonderful person she was. She never bore any malice towards Elizabeth Taylor over that. But, you had people, it was almost like, I want to say, wife swapping going on or something, but you had really something going on at that time, which many people called it Sodom and Gomorrah. They thought it was the end of the world. You had, husbands leaving wives and wives leaving husbands, and all this was being done in broad daylight, being covered by the news media. While they were trying to do a moon space program,
Right.
You remember that?
Sure.
When I think it was Scott Glenn was orbiting the Earth. John Glenn, I'm sorry, was orbiting the Earth. And Elizabeth Taylor pushed that off the front page. She became like Donald Trump. She was controlling the media 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You couldn't get anything else on the news. You know,
that's unbelievable.
It's crazy.
Of course, I was a little bit younger then, and I wasn't following that closely. But so she pushed John Glenn off the front page.
She pushed John Glenn off the front page, and she was. We must remember in 1963, as I mentioned in the book, she was the most famous woman on the planet.
Yeah.
There was nobody more famous than Elizabeth Taylor at that time. So she brought a lot of the spotlight to the Night of the Iguana. Then, of course, you have Ava Gardner.
Right. So tell me,
what
kind
goodness.
of price did Ava pay?
It's like, does anyone have any Valium here? You had Ava Gardner, who was at that point divorced from Frank Sinatra, and she was living in Spain. She was an exile. She had left the United States, and she was living in Madrid at that time. And she was a real piece of work, I want to say. She was another celebrity who was drinking and partying and, kicking up her heels and taking off her skirt and doing whatever she was doing. And they had a field day with her. I mean, she was kind of like Madonna in many ways.
Interesting.
At that time. So John Huston had a history with Ava. They went back many years. They were good friends. But she was a handful. So against the advice of the producer of the movie, whose name is Ray Stark, who a lot of people remember because he produced Funny Girl, which he was making Funny Girl, not the movie. I'm talking about the Broadway show. That was actually in production at the same time as the Night of the Iguana. Oh. And so Ray Stark, at the same time Barbara Streisand was doing rehearsals for Funny Girl, Ray Stark was flying between New York and Puerto Vallarta to produce the film. And he said to John Huston, John, he said, you don't want Ava Gardner there. She's going to be too much trouble. Because she was a very difficult actress to work with. Everybody I interviewed said, "Oh, what a pain in the ass," right? Mm-hmm. Literally, she just was too difficult and too temperamental. Is the way I would describe her. But John Huston said to Ray Stark, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." So now we have Ava Gardner, and at that point, her career had hit almost, I want to say, rock bottom. She had nowhere to go. She was making these cheesy movies in Spain, and John said, "Now listen, Ava, they flew to Madrid, Mm-hmm. He went with Ray Stark, and they went out to the flamenco clubs, and they were, drinking all night. And he said, now listen, Abel, this is your last chance to come back and make a good movie, or your career is basically over. So he said, sober up, get rid of these bullfighters that she was sleeping with, and go and get yourself, dried out, freshen yourself up, lose some weight, give up the booze, and come down and let's make this movie. I mean, that's in essence what he had to do to get it. I mean, it was tough, but there was a lot riding on the movie for everyone. Now, your next person in this is Deborah Carr, who was also a free spirit. All these people had their own little reason for doing the movie. But Deborah was a free spirit. She had moved to Switzerland with her husband, Peter Viertel, who was a writer, a very well-known writer, and had written many movies at that time. She was kind of holding out at that time for a really good role. She got tired of playing nuns and all these, these pretty, and very decorous roles that she'd been doing for years and years, notwithstanding From Here to Eternity and all that stuff. She was mostly famous for playing roles like The King and I at that time, and A Fair to Remember, the film she did with Cary Grant. So when John Huston said to Deborah, who was also a friend, he said, you know what? He said, come down to Mexico. We're going to have a lot of fun. He gave her a chance to do something she hadn't done before, which was kind of get, down and dirty in the palm trees, that type of thing. Uh-huh. So she became the third wheel in the love triangle between Richard Burton, Ava Gardner, right? So you had Richard in the middle and those two women. And then the next person in the story is lovely Sue Lyon, who had just finished a film called Lolita, which everybody's heard of, I'm sure, where she played this little nymphette, teenage girl that all these people were lusting over, wanting to have carnal desires with Sue Lyon. So they threw her into the story and wrote this part for her based on the original play, but they actually made it bigger for her so she had more screen time. So now you've got Richard Burton with Ava Gardner, Deborah Carr, and Sue Lyon. And watching all this, if you can imagine from the sidelines, is Elizabeth Taylor, who's saying to everybody, nobody is allowed to talk to my honey, because she said, I don't want him to get away. She certainly didn't want him with Ava Gardner, or even Deborah Carr, who probably wouldn't have strayed. But especially Sue Line, she was very concerned about that. So she really exercised a lot of control over the movie. So having said all that, all these people hoped in some way that they were either going to avoid persecution if they'd stayed in the US or Europe. By being in Mexico, they hoped to keep everyone at a distance, or they hoped that the film would be a big enough success, especially in the case of Ava Gardner, that it would, help their career a lot. And of course, John Huston at that time, his career had been going up and down, and he needed a hit too. So money talks. Everybody thought, well, with all the news coverage, with all the media attention here, it's going to be a good film. The big thing about the making of The Night of the Iguana that I think has the most impact is what it did to these poor people here in Puerto Vallarta who had never seen movie stars here, with the exception maybe of one or two who were here, Mexican stars, on vacation. They'd never seen anything like this. It was like a 3-ring circus coming to town. And they weren't just here for a week. They were here for 3, almost 4 months of filming. The filming started in Mexico City when the film actually commenced principal photography. It started in Mexico City, and then they flew in a series of rented planes. They came down to Guadalajara, and then they had to transfer into smaller planes to come down here. At that time, Puerto Vallarta did not have highways like it does now.
Correct.
And it did not have easy access. You had to really put up with, there were no direct flights. You had to put up with 2 and 3 planes to get here. It was a long trip. Or you had to come overland by jeep, basically from Guadalajara. So I detail all that as well, just to put people in the picture, because it wasn't like it is today. Of course, you had the cathedral, which is it's a very famous image. And you had a lot of the downtown area. The streets were here, of course, and the houses. But you did not have the density of buildings or the population that you do have now. It was substantially different.
Right.
And the mountains, forget just the city for a moment, but the mountains had nothing on them. There were no condominiums, no apartments, nothing. Conscious Chinas did not exist. Everything behind the city was just green.
Right.
And that's what you had as far as the eye can see. So they were really in a place, it was almost like being in Africa. I mean, they were in a place that very few people would come to unless they had a good reason, for coming down here.
Sure.
And then they all had to live together and get along together. And they weren't necessarily enemies, but they certainly had a lot of egos and a lot of contradictions, let's put it that way. And then, of course, every time you turned around, you had a cameraman pointing a lens at you, and a newspaper, a reporter asking you silly questions. So they didn't get a lot of privacy either.
Now, was that by design, though? Did John Huston, make it a point to really make things look maybe a little bit more risque, just to get more photographers and cameramen and newspapers out there to, report on this movie that obviously he was banking on?
Well, he may have been thinking it, but the villain of the piece actually is Ray Stark. He's the one who was stirring the pot because he was the producer. Ray was a very shrewd man, very smart. He was basically the Wizard of Oz. He was pulling all the strings in Hollywood, and he did this for many, many years. He's a figure that many people liked. For those who don't know who he is, I mentioned Barbra Streisand, who he had under personal contract. He's responsible for her career. He also, as a lot of people remember, he was responsible for all the Neil Simon movies. You remember Neil Simon wrote these wonderful movies over the years, and Ray had an option on every Neil Simon play, and he put Neil Simon plays on the screen. So The Sunshine Boys, Murder by Death, all these wonderful movies we watched in the cinemas back then were all produced by Ray Stark. And he discovered a lot of actors. So for many, many years, he had the kind of the Midas touch, but he did it through threats. He did it through intimidation. He was a very hard-edged producer, but he did it with a big smile. So he got what he wanted, and he had a lot riding on The Night of the Iguana. This film was intended to make money. That's why he had Richard Burton. He could have had any of the other actors that he was offered, but he very, very cleverly imagined that the film would be a lot more successful with Richard Burton because of Elizabeth Taylor and the publicity it would bring. Had Richard Burton not been with Elizabeth Taylor, I don't think they would have had him in the movie. That's my opinion. But history has proved the film to be very enduring, and it's still shown, as you know, it still pops up on TV, and it's been released on DVD. And there's always talk of a remake, and that's the way Hollywood is. But the thing is, the movie was very successful because coming off of Cleopatra, everybody wanted to see, the public were just in a frenzy to see what would happen with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. Now, after the movie was finished, Ava Gardner went back to Spain. John Huston went to Italy to start production on his next film, which was ironically called The Bible. And and he wasn't religious, I don't think. But that was his atonement, I guess, for his sins that he committed during the making of this movie. Deborah Carr went back to Switzerland, and Elizabeth and Richard stayed in Puerto Vallarta. The house, which was just up the street in Gringo Gulch, is a tourist attraction. They were renting that. They were waiting for their divorces to become final, and they celebrated after they divorced their respective spouses. They purchased the house and spent Christmas and the New Year here, and kicked off the beginning of the, Liz and Dick phenomenon when they actually became, together, and they made a lot of good movies. And they lived here together and separately even after they divorced. 10 years later, they lived here for a long, long time. So the movie just didn't end when the filming stopped. It continued in the afterlife, and they brought a lot to Puerto Vallarta. They actually showed a good side because they were very, very generous with their time and their money, and they did very quietly contribute to the city. A lot of people don't know that, but the two of them were very good citizens, and nobody in Puerto Vallarta has a bad word to say about Elizabeth Taylor or Richard Burton because they did a lot for the city. They brought a lot of tourism here, a lot of investment, and we're sitting here today in Puerto Vallarta talking about this, but we might not be here if it weren't for those people. If the Night of the Iguana had not been made here, it's debatable if Puerto Vallarta would be what it is today. I think because of the foresight of John Huston, and certainly the participation of Taylor, Burton, and the others, it certainly created something special here, the likes of which we've never seen anywhere else. And Ray Stark said something that I want to share with you, which I think is very prescient. He said, no other movie location changed a city. This location, Puerto Vallarta, did. For better or for worse, it completely changed the face of Puerto Vallarta, and it made it a unique destination which lives on, of course, and we're now into the 21st century, and we're still talking about this movie that was made in 1963. I think it's remarkable, and that's the reason, really, that I thought the book was warranted. And I wanted to get out the story about the making of the movie. Most times when you read about it, it's a paragraph or a couple of pages that someone's written in a travel magazine. And I said, that's not good enough for this movie and not good enough for Puerto Vallarta. I'm going to fix it. So I hope I did a good job. Readers will tell me if I did a good job. You be the judge. People who are listening, you be the judge. And I hope you get as much fun out of the book and learn as much from the book as I did writing it.
Well, I've had a lot of fun talking with you today, Howard, and I've got to say that I think that we're all going to be very grateful for your book. And I want to thank you. And could you please tell our audience where they can buy the book, where they can find the book?
Well, I have a website. My other books were published in hardcover, and then they went into softcover. I've decided to go a different route this time. And so I have a website. It's astolenparadise.com, very simple. You can go to A Stolen Paradise, and all the information about the book is there. You can sign up for newsletters and information about the book. We're getting ready to launch it, and I'm very happy to share information. I also have a Facebook page for the book as well. So anybody who's interested, I know there's a lot of people out there who are telling me, hurry up, we're waiting. But it's on its way. It's coming out soon. So you can register to sign up for the book, and I will send you information about it. But it will be coming out this year, 2017.
Well, I want you to know, Howard, that I've already signed up for that book, and I hope that my listeners will all do the same. Howard, you are the best. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy, busy day and visiting with us.
I've enjoyed it tremendously. Thank you so much, Barry.
Okay, that was a really fun interview, wasn't it? I can't wait for this book to come out. Waiting. Anyway, back to the new federal taxi rates from the airport to a resort near you. And here they are. Now, as I reported earlier, there was an increase in fuel prices here in Mexico, and we were pretty sure it was just a matter of time before it affected the taxi prices. So here we go. Zone 1A from the airport to the marina, 242 pesos, or about $12 US for a taxi, and 458 pesos for a van, or approximately $12 US. Oh, I'm sorry, $22 US. Sorry, I'm doing this all in my head. Remember, the exchange rates are about 20 pesos to the US dollar. Zone 1 from the airport to the hotel zone is going to be 258 pesos, or about $13 US for a taxi, 520 pesos, or about $25 US for a van. Zone 2 from the airport to downtown to as far south as Conchas Chinas, you're going to be paying 345 pesos, or about $18 US for a cab, and 690 pesos, or approximately $35 US for a van. And if you're going to be going beyond Conchas Chinas to Zone 3, anywhere between Conchas Chinas all the way to Mismaloya, you're going to be paying 415 pesos, or approximately $20 US for a cab, and 811 pesos, or approximately $40 US for a van ride. Make sure, you guys, that you tip your drivers if they're going to be handling your luggage, so tip them on top of those particular prices. Now, you're going to find similar rates for the zones north of the airport, and you're going to see the map and the prices by going to my show notes and looking for it on my blog post by going to www.puertovallartatravelshow.com. Now, once again, it looks like we've gone way too long here, so let's save some of this great information until next week, shall we? Until then, remember that this is an interactive show where I depend on your questions and your suggestions about all things Puerto Vallarta. If you think of something that I should be talking about, come on, reach out to me, click on the Contact Us tab, and send us your message. And remember, if you're considering booking any type of tour while you're in Puerto Vallarta, you must go to vallartainfo.com. That's JR's website, where you can reserve your tour through him right from his website. And remember, this is a value for value proposition. His experience and on-the-ground knowledge of everything Puerto Vallarta in exchange for your making a purchase of a tour that you do anyway. You're just doing it through him as a way of saying thank you. Thanks, JR, for being our guide. It costs you no more than if you were to use someone else, so just do it. And when you do take one of those tours, email me about your experiences. Maybe you can come on board and share with others what you liked, or maybe what you didn't like about the tour. Again, contact me by clicking on the Contact Us tab and sending off a message. And one more favor, please. If you like this podcast, and if you've listened this far, I'm guessing you do, take the time and subscribe. Give me a good review on iTunes if you would. That way, we can get the word out to more and more people about the magic of this place, Puerto Vallarta. So thanks for listening all the way through this episode of the Puerto Vallarta Travel Show. This is Barry Kessler, signing off with a wish for you all to slow down, be kind, and live the Vallarta lifestyle. Nos vemos, amigos.
de Puerto.